All right, today we're going to jump right into a really high-stakes story. We're talking military force, secret shipping networks, and a massive geopolitical fight for one of the biggest oil reserves on the planet. This whole thing is playing out on the open ocean, and believe me, it could literally decide the future of an entire country.
So you've probably seen the headlines, right? A tanker seized at dawn. But that single ship, that's just the tip of the iceberg. This is not some random one-off event. Oh no. It's the latest move in a huge campaign that's unfolding on the high seas. So the real question is, what's actually going on here?
Okay, let's start at the very beginning. The story kicks off in the dark, just before dawn, out in the Caribbean Sea. And what happens next is a military operation that's a huge signal, a major escalation in U.S. policy toward Venezuela.
The target had a name, the Veronica. And this wasn't just any ship. It's an Aframax-class tanker. Now, if you don't know, these things are basically the workhorses of the global oil industry. They move a ton of crude. According to U.S. Southern Command, their forces moved in, intercepted it, and seized the whole vessel. Boom, done. Swiftly and without any trouble.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The Veronica, it's not a one-off, not by a long shot. It's actually the sixth tanker with ties to Venezuelan oil that the U.S. has targeted just since mid-December. So yeah, this isn't some random event. It's a pattern, and it's definitely speeding up.
All right, so let's zoom out a bit. We've seen the specific seizure, but what's the bigger picture here? Well, this is all part of a much, much broader strategy coming out of Washington, and it's aimed squarely at Venezuela's single most critical resource.
So you might be wondering, how can they legally do this?
Well, the official justification is something called a maritime quarantine. President Trump declared this policy, and what it does is it essentially gives U.S. forces the green light to stop and seize any ships they say are violating sanctions in the area. It's the legal framework for this whole campaign. And if you want to understand the end goal here, you really don't have to look very far. Just listen to what the administration is saying themselves. U.S. Southern Command put it very bluntly. Their objective is to make sure that no oil leaves Venezuela unless it's properly and lawfully coordinated. That's about as clear as it gets. They want to control the flow of the country's entire economic lifeblood. So here's the key takeaway on this part. The ship seizures, those are just the tactic. The long-term goal is way bigger. It's totally strategic. The real aim here is to get a chokehold on who's buying and selling Venezuelan oil. We're talking about fundamentally reshaping the country's entire energy sector from the outside in. Now, let's talk about the targets themselves. The U.S. isn't just randomly grabbing any oil tanker out there. No, they're very specifically hunting something called shadow fleets. And that opens up this whole other secretive, really complex world of sanctioned oil. So what in the world is a shadow fleet? Well, think of it like this. It's a whole network of tankers whose entire business is moving oil for sanctioned countries, like Venezuela. They live in the shadows, operating in this legal gray area, and they use all sorts of sneaky tactics to hide where they're from, what they're carrying, and where they're going. And the tactics they use are, pretty clever and all about deception. For example, they'll fly false flags from other countries. The Veronica itself was flying a flag from Guyana. They use fake shipping records to cover their tracks. And get this, they'll even keep operating after major authorities in places like Panama and the Cook Islands have officially revoked their registrations. They just don't stop. And I want you to understand the scale of this whole thing, because it is massive. It's not just the 6 ships they've already targeted. Nope. U.S. authorities are right now seeking court warrants to seize dozens more. This hunt for the shadow fleet is clearly a huge priority, and it's growing fast.
Okay, but none of this is happening in a vacuum, right? You have to understand the context. These seizures on the high seas are taking place at a moment of just incredible political chaos and uncertainty inside Venezuela itself.
Just look at this timeline for a second. It shows you how fast everything is moving. Just earlier this month, you have U.S. forces capturing President Nicolás Maduro. Today, you've got this tanker seizure. And then, coming up very soon, President Trump is scheduled to meet with opposition leader Maria Corina Machado. It is an absolute whirlwind of events, and every single one has huge implications. And this right here really shows the deep strategic problem Washington is wrestling with. On one hand, you have President Trump publicly praising Machado, calling her a symbol of democratic opposition, but he doesn't actually endorse her to be the next leader. Then, on the other hand, there's a classified U.S. intelligence assessment that apparently says something totally different. It concludes that for stability, at least in the short term, figures from the old Maduro government might actually be the better option. This just creates this huge cloud of uncertainty about who the U.S. actually thinks can or even should run Venezuela.
So let's tie this all together. What does it all mean? You've got this really aggressive action happening out on the ocean, and at the same time, you've got this deep, deep political uncertainty on the ground in Venezuela. What is all of this pointing to for the future?
Here it is, the key takeaway. The U.S. is moving, and moving aggressively, to take actual physical control of Venezuela's most valuable asset, its oil. And it's happening at the very same moment that nobody, not even, it seems, U.S. intelligence, has any real idea who is actually going to be in charge of the country. You're watching a complete power vacuum form in real time.
And so all of this leaves us with one final, really critical question. With the country's main source of money being seized and controlled by an outside power, and its own leadership in total chaos, who is actually going to control Venezuela's future?